Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jeff.
What? No. Go away, Jeff. I've sworn off Chaos Demon energy. I'm a sensible creator now.
But Liz, you decided to make 5 different outfits for this one video.
Didn't I? Hi, I'm Liz, and for the billionth time, I have bitten off more than I can chew. Long story short, I decided to explore the wild and wonderful world of pattern drafting guides, specifically those for the average home sewist. Over the past 2 years, I have accumulated quite a collection of these systems, ranging from the late Victorian to the early 70s. I decided to put them all to the test. Some of these systems are proprietary and patented, while others are more ways of doing, kind of generally accepted best practice for sewists. Some of them are focused on designing your garment from scratch, while others are little more than adapting existing commercial patterns. For each system, I chose a year when the system would have been realistically used and created a period-appropriate costume to draft and sew. The systems I chose are the following: the diamond garment cutter system from Goldsberry and Doran circa 1895, adapting a commercial pattern that is the wrong size circa 1935, the proprietary sloper pattern from Vogue, Dorothy Moore's pattern drafting and dressmaking book from 1968, and the Style and Fit pattern kit from 1972. I will say now that this is not a tutorial, nor is it likely to be very instructive. Book Hoarding by Bianca, a fellow Jane Austen mega nerd, is a funny, engaging costuber who has started sharing lessons and tips about pattern drafting that she is learning from formal fashion classes. Bianca and I, along with many costubers, believe in making information more freely available and accessible in this way. Her exceptional flat pattern basics video is linked in the card above and in the description. So first to the 1890s. The system disclosed in this book is not a product of new thoughts and ideas, but the result of 18 years of study and practice by experienced teachers along the line. The system is very simple. It has been our aim to couch the language in this book in such simple terms that a mere child could comprehend and understand. The above illustration represents the complete outfit, known as the diamond garment cutting system. These scales, 14 in number, are divided into spaces instead of inches, and are used to represent the different bust and waist measurements. Sourcing them today, when you can find them at all, is a costly business, so I opted for a little extra work in cutting them out from a PDF pattern purchased for $5 at the link below. I made the silly decision to cut out all of these rulers when I would only be using 2. Why? I don't know. The measurements for all of the outfits in this video were done in the foundations I would be wearing. I don't have a late Victorian corset, so I improvised with my 1860s corset by tightening it a little differently and adding a bust improver to compensate for the difference. Thence to drafting. This process is straightforward in concept, but extremely fiddly. The square is used for all straight lines and is the first article of the outfit which you must learn to use, as you will find in the following pages. Place your square in position on your drafting paper, and draw your base line. While your square is still in position, draw your cross line. This line will intersect your baseline at right angles at A. Since I didn't have the original solid rulers, I had to rig up a slightly ramshackle version with the straight edges and rulers that I had on hand. For each of the ensembles, I wanted to make something relatively simple, something I could imagine would appeal to someone new to making patterns. This pattern calls itself seamless, in the very Victorian matter of calling a spade a club and declaring it to be close enough. It does have seams, though granted fewer than any Victorian pattern I've ever seen. This pattern system, like each and every one I came across, assumes a baseline knowledge of sewing garments, which makes sense. You've got to crawl before you can walk. Nevertheless, the instructions for this gown were painfully sparse. They read as follows. Use the scale corresponding with the bust measure to draft to the waist, collar, and sleeve. This is truly a novelty, there being but one seam in the waist, one in the sleeve, and one in the skirt. The velvet may be omitted on the waist if desirable. The chiffon ruffle around the neck and down the front would be very becoming. If the waist is too small when drafted out, make it larger in the front, not in the back. The skirt is given on page 42. is drafted by the waist measure. Cut on the straight of the goods in front. Regulate the length to suit. I had decided to do my best to put aside as much of my existing knowledge as possible about pattern drafting and to try and approach each system as if that book was teaching me my first lessons on the subject. Obviously, you can't erase all of your own knowledge and experience on a subject, so I used a helpful phrase to quash my own instinct when it ran counter to whatever guide I was following. Maybe they know something I don't know. That phrase really helped me ignore things that I had a strong suspicion wouldn't work for me. It helps to have imposter syndrome and to partly believe it most of the time anyways, but I digress. Another thing I tried to do was only reference sources from roughly the same time period if I got stuck on a construction point. So when it came to fasteners, stay tape, assembly, etc., I relied on sewing guides that I could from archive.org. So the facing, interfacing, stay tapes, lining, fastener, and etc. were all decided by me based on knowledge of the period and period references. That is where I believe most of the fundamental user errors came in. This was a tight fit, and while I'm sure that it may be a little snug in the pattern itself, I am certain that I neglected some necessary fact which would have made the fasteners at the front a little bit better. But necessity is the mother of invention, and being unable to hide the unsightly fasteners with the original velvet stripe, I concocted a marvelous bit of frippery with a wide strip of velvet fabric, pleated in the manner described in a sewing manual I had printed out in younger and more reckless times. The volume and the width of this ruffle did a really great job of hiding the hooks. Now all was needed was the velvet details at the hem and sleeves, and voila! Oh, and by that I mean I chose to devote an entire evening to sewing a bum pad to better shape the skirt, using an online tutorial and stuffing composed of secondhand polyfill and coleslaw scraps. Because, you know, Liz is a maniac. Remember that this is an age of handwork, and that very few desire to wear apparel lacking in individuality as well as in fit and finish. When we say handmade, we do not mean that each and every stitch must be taken by hand entirely to the exclusion of the sewing machine, but we do mean that your gown is designed and made according to your own individual tastes and ideas, and for you exclusively. It is not turned out from the factory, like thousands before it, to be altered and adjusted to fit any indiscriminate buyer. Acquire then for yourself this knowledge of building, beginning with the fundamental rules and principles governing the same, and finally acquire that artistic knowledge of arrangement of materials known as the art of dressmaking. Because the instructions were so sparse for this particular pattern, I actually had a really good time coming up with solutions myself and problem solving in the ways that I could fill the gaps in my knowledge, because genuinely I have a lot of gaps still in my knowledge of Victorian dress, and so when it came down to it, I had to make a lot of these decisions independently. That was a lot of fun and produced some pretty excellent results. I'm actually kind of proud of myself. Now we move on to the 1930s. Once again, measurements were taken in basic foundations. The pink negligee I intended to wear was dirty at this moment, so the 50s base did fine. What I needed for this garment was a garment that was not my size. Until around the 1980s, commercial patterns were sold in individual sizes, as opposed to the size ranges that come in a single pattern envelope today. So I found a suspender skirt pattern deliberately a size too small, and followed guides in various sewing manuals on how to make appropriate adjustments. I think it's a given that the bigger the discrepancy, the less likely this method is to work, so I stayed within one size difference for myself. Not having any books handy specifically from the 1930s, I used Mary Lynch's Sewing Made Easy, copyright 1950. Truth be told, this system, which is really just basic alteration steps, has been outlined in sewing manuals and books between the 1920s through to today, so I didn't feel too bad about this slight anachronism. I chose the 1930s for this method because it seemed to me the most efficient in terms of cost versus time, and the Great Depression forced that trade-off on folks like never before. Why draft a pattern from scratch when a commercial pattern had done 99% of the work for you? If your friend had a pattern you liked but in a different size, why waste money on a new size? Just borrow, trace, and adjust. Frankly, very little has changed, except maybe the language used to describe bodies of different sizes. If you're not keen on the judgy language of days gone by, Sandra Betzina's book Fast Fit is a comprehensive guide on pattern adjustment that treats the body as a fact and focuses instead on fit and comfort. I can't promise it solves all problem of body normativity, but it seems to do its level best. The adjustment for this pattern seemed simple, just an increase in the waist. But I hadn't reckoned with the facing and interfacing, which came in a different number of pieces and therefore required slightly different accommodations in size. That required some unpicking and some ad hoc adjustments after the fact. Luckily, my overambition didn't extend to the blouse that I made to wear under the suspender skirt. That was made from a pattern that was in my size and already fit properly. It seems unnecessary to point out all pattern alterations should be made carefully. Yet we have seen, and we are certain that you have too, women who seem to run wild as soon as they picked up a pair of scissors. Slashing the pattern here, adding an inch there, whacking off an inch there. The result was exactly what you would expect. A badly fitting, unattractive garment which clearly reflected the careless and haphazard way in which it had been fitted and put together. This one was my absolute favorite of all of the garments to both make and wear. Dang if that pattern and design don't go so well together with the fabric. I'm just so pleased with it. I'm going to wear it a bunch. It is such a cute outfit. Vogue Basic Pattern is an experimental guide to follow in altering all patterns to your individual measurements when they vary from those given on the Vogue sizing chart. Choose your size by bust measurement. We do not recommend increasing or decreasing at the bust line. This is the most contoured part of your pattern, and any change affects the arm side of the pattern. The waistline and hip can be increased or decreased up to 2 inches. To increase the hip more than 2 inches, we recommend using 2 pattern sizes, one for the bodice and one for the skirt. The added expense of the second size saves hours of fitting time and gives more satisfying results. All adjustments your figure requires on a basic pattern are to be used in making adjustments on all patterns used in the future. Example, if you have discovered that you are an inch shorter from the neck to waistline on the basic pattern, every coat, dress, blouse, or jacket, regardless of design, will have to be shortened 1 inch as in the basic pattern. Check your muslin with the illustrations. Examine the personal fitting problems in the muslin and transfer adjustments to the pattern. Pattern companies, along with ready-made clothing manufacturers, create their designs based on a base template which is then adjusted in style but not proportions for every individual garment. What I didn't know until last year is that many pattern companies offered that base template as its own sewing sloper pattern with instructions on how to alter it for a better fit. These alterations could then be applied to any pattern purchased from that same company. Not only is this helpful, it's a stroke of marketing genius. It combines brand loyalty with the IKEA effect, which is when consumers value products more highly if they contributed to their construction. Not only did you make the clothes, you customized the pattern. Welcome to the Vogue 5000. As opposed to the previous method from the 1930s where we were adjusting a pattern because it was the wrong size, this method is predicated on the idea that you have the pattern that matches your own measurements as closely as possible. One way especially that Vogue distinguished itself is by publishing this behemoth text, which can be used just by itself as a high-quality reference manual, or as the most intense guide for a pattern ever. This particular copy of the pattern is from the early 1960s, but Vogue's template was the same from the 1940s at least as far as I've been able to tell, so I opted for the 1950s. The pattern for this project was tough to find. I wanted a 1950s Vogue pattern which was in my size. That was a tough Venn diagram to crack, but I managed it. Since I showed you footage of me sewing the original garment sloper, I opted not to film any sewing of the final garment. Was this because the pattern came late in the process and I had run out of patience and just wanted it done? I'll never tell. There is really something to be said for the context of putting on a garment that you've made with full hair and makeup, ready to go out into the world as if you're doing a photo shoot, or in my case, actually doing a photo shoot, that just makes it come alive. I was so underwhelmed by this garment until I had it in this full outfit, at which point I was absolutely enchanted by it. A note to the reader. When my husband received his orders from Okinawa, it all sounded so wonderful, but never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined the education I was to receive during my 2 years on Okinawa. Paul, my husband, had gone 3 months earlier and had everything set up for me to begin housekeeping at a village near Naha, the port city of Okinawa. A short time after my arrival, I answered a knock at the door and found an Okinawan girl who spoke very little English. She asked, "Need sew girl Okusan?" Of course, I asked her in, mostly out of curiosity. We tried for a while to communicate, and finally she said, "Show me a picture, Okusan." So I picked out a picture of a dress I thought I might like to have. She then asked for some newspaper and proceeded to take my measurements and draw a pattern on the newspaper. I just had to learn how she did that. As soon as possible, I found and enrolled in a pattern drafting and dressmaking school operated by an English-speaking Japanese. I saw how he started out with one line on the board and proceeded to make a complete pattern. I had no doubts as to what I wanted to do with my time on the island. With a maid to do the housework and my husband doing most of the cooking, I spent all my time and energy studying and experimenting with the formulas, which are the basis of all pattern making and dress designing. The Chinese began this method of pattern designing centuries ago. By taking a person's measurements, they make the pattern and proceed to make clothes to fit individually. Today, who can question the quality and fit of a Hong Kong tailored suit? This method of taking the measurements and following a formula to make patterns that will fit is the answer to the puzzled and frequently frustrated housewives and seamstresses all over America. Wait, what? When I got this guide, I looked at the pictures, read bits and pieces, and, like everyone else in the world, I skipped the preface. But when I went back to look at the preface, I found that this was the most interesting part of the system, but for not good reasons. So, to make short work of the details, this system is very similar to consumer drafting and dress cutting systems of the late 19th century, such as the Keystone Guide, the National Garment Cutter, and the previously explored Diamond Drafting Guide. But instead of proprietary apportioning scales, this system employs simple self-measurements and basic formulas for creating your own base template. Now, let's talk about this preface and the journey I went on as a result. Dorothy Moore was the wife of a serviceman stationed at a military base in Okinawa, the southwesternmost prefecture of Japan. I don't have any firm dates for Moore's presence, aside from the context that this book was first published in 1968, but here are some things that I do know. Moore lived near Naha, which suggests that her husband was an airman with the Marine Corps stationed at Futenma Air Station, built by the military in 1945 during the invasion and occupation of Japan by the US and Allied forces. 1/3 of Okinawa's civilian population had perished during the invasion. Futenma remains an American air station to this day, and US military presence in Okinawa remains a controversial topic. She takes the class from, quote, an English-speaking Japanese, earns a certificate, and becomes qualified to teach the method. Hooray! Except that she not only doesn't name the local seamstress who originally inspired her to learn this skill, but she doesn't name the instructor that she so admires, nor the school where she enrolled. She published this book originally under the title, quote, The Oriental Method of Pattern Drafting and Dressmaking. Yeesh. Granted, I am not anywhere near an expert in traditional garment construction from China, but I had enough knowledge of kimono construction in Japan to know that this was at least partly untrue. Given that her example of this method in practice was the quality of a bespoke suit from Hong Kong, a Western-style garment made in a city that was colonized by the British until 1997, this hardly seems like a good example for a supposedly centuries-old method of pattern drafting. To make sure I wasn't telling tales out of school and that I hadn't gotten something spectacularly wrong, I looked for some source material. A big thank you to Cat Eye on Designs, Confused Kitty Sewing, and Lawrence Wenyu Lee, who shared books and sources that were helpful in confirming what I had suspected. Chinese garment construction, similar to Japan and most of Europe for most of history, created garments traditionally which comprised mainly of squares and rectangles. When personal measurements were applied, they were applied minimally, using the base formula of squares and rectangles in order to maintain both an economy of fabric and a consistency of style. I don't have enough knowledge or background to expound further than that, and it's not the focus of this video, but egads, the bizarre combination of stereotyping, appeal to ancient wisdom, and total cultural obliviousness in this preface and author's note is truly bizarre. Based on my research, it's likely that Moore attended one of the fashion schools whose main Tokyo location had extended franchise opportunities to other cities in Japan, possibly the Bunka School. While sources for this information were pretty scarce, I did find one incredibly helpful book called Fabricating Consumers: The Sewing Machine in Modern Japan, which outlined the cultural, economic, and social contexts surrounding the sewing machine's introduction to Japan. While a single secondary source cannot be totally relied upon, this book did an excellent job describing how these factors affected the development of Japanese yosai sewing techniques. In perhaps the most gratifying turn of events, this system and the garment that it produced were both my least favorite. The darts, sizing, and guidance were all lackluster, if not totally lacking. The belt and strategic tugging is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here in making this dress look decent. It is by far my least favorite, and honestly, it's kind of a mess when it's not all done up like this. I am probably most proud of my Bridget Bardot makeup look. I spent so much time trying to get this look right, and I feel like I really did succeed. It was kind of worth making the not great dress because it gave me an excuse to dress up like this. Long story short, this book is a disaster. There are much better ones out there, and also, you know, creepy Orientalism. Let's give that a rest.
Brought to you by...
Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons who make these videos possible, and especially who encourage me when I'm going through a bit of an overwhelming time like I did recently with my big move. I'm always so grateful to you all. You are all so supportive of me, and I absolutely cannot begin to thank you. For early viewing on my videos, as well as extra insight into my video making process, the occasional extra video, and other fun perks, make sure to visit my Patreon page and support me at the link below.
Home sewers, after hours of frustrating alterations and endless patterns, does your garment still fit badly? No mass-produced pattern can fit two people exactly the same way. Now, with the new Style and Fit, your problem is solved. Make your own perfect fitting pattern every time. Take only 2 measurements. Choose a style. Make a series of dots on your pattern paper and join them. In just minutes, you've made a pattern custom fit to your figure. Interchange sleeves, collars, accessories, even basic bodies. Create over 500 different styles or copy almost anything you see in fashion magazines or stores. From a simple house dress to a smart pantsuit to an elegant evening gown. Make your own original wardrobe today. Style and Fit comes with these professional tools: grading scale, armhole guide, French curve, even pattern paper. Complete kit, only $3.99.
Oh my. Well, the commercial really said it all. We're in the 70s now. All of my life, I have loved the look of a maxi dress, but almost always these dresses are way too long for me. So what's a girl to do? Draft her own, of course. The Style and Fit Pattern Making and Fashion Styling Kit brings together the talents of outstanding pattern drafters, designers, and fashion stylists from around the world. It will show you in 6 easy-to-understand chapters what a pattern consists of and how to grade or enlarge pre-marked miniature patterns to your exact figure measurements, using only your bust and hip measurements. You will learn in just minutes how to mix and match different body styles, sleeves, collars, pockets, and accessories to create your own year-round fashionable wardrobe, or copy practically any garment you see in your favorite fashion magazine, newspaper, or store window. Even if you are an experienced seamstress, be sure to read each chapter carefully, step by step, and you will be amazed at how easy it is to grade your own patterns and design your own clothes in the comfort of your own home. Regardless of whether you want to make a simple house dress, a chic pantsuit outfit, a glamorous evening gown, or a jumpsuit for your husband, the know-how, the tools, the fun, and the savings are now all yours. This system was definitely the easiest. I had all of the supplies, the garment was intended for a loose fit, and I chose to ditch the zipper, replacing it rather with a slit fastened with a hook and eye at the back. After it was made, I decided that the fabric wasn't as autumn as I had wanted it to be. The colors were too bright, too white, too summery. So I dyed it. A combination of brown and red dye got me this gorgeous maroon color, which also gave the nylon sleeves a matching wine shade. The colors of the print show through, but in that lovely faded 70s way. Mwah! It's just fantastic. This was another one where I was actually pretty proud of the makeup and hair as well. I did my best to do a sort of Farrah Fawcett blowout look, but unfortunately, because I had spent 2 days doing this to my face and hair, at this point, it was so tired that I just didn't want to put any more hairspray into it, and I ended up kind of having a little bit more of a relaxed look than I had intended, but I still think that the effect comes across, and look how long my hair is now. This is amazing. This was so much fun to do. This is another outfit that I feel pretty confident will make a couple of trips out into the real world. I have to say, going all out with the hair and makeup really made these garments come alive. I was feeling pretty crummy about most of them, all the way until I got dolled up and gave myself a photo shoot. That really turned it around, and honestly, I was feeling the best I had about this whole project during this photo shoot. So, it seems as though Jeff, the beloved manifestation of my Chaos Demon energy, is still alive and well. For now, he has been pretty well sated, and I'll be able to make more than 1 video per month going forward, at least for a while. Say goodbye, Jeff.
Goodbye!
Have a great week, and I'll see you soon.